I'd love for parents to find these books as well and say, wow, this might help my daughter. I know she's struggling with this, and I'm at a loss as to how to connect or how to make her understand that I'm here for her, and maybe these will help.
Hello and welcome to the podcast Homespun Script. I'm your host, Nate Knuspel. My guest today is Laura E. Thompson. Laura is the author of several series in the fantasy and YA coming-of-age genres. She is also an owner and developmental editor for Writer's Journey Services, a comprehensive editing service. Her most recent project is the Freak or Unique series, published under her maiden name, L.E. LaBarge. The first book in the series, Amity Boppin story, is a coming-of-age narrative revolving around the titular character, Amity, recounting how she navigates the latter half of middle school while dealing with a recent diagnosis of epilepsy. The second book in the series, Hattie Ratall story, tells the story of Amity's best friend Hattie during that same time and her struggles with body image and family instability. Laura, thank you so much for joining us. It's an honor and privilege to have you today.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, my name is Laura, and I grew up in a small town in Vermont in the 90s. So back then, no internet and not a lot of gaming systems. So we spent our time outside playing and with our imaginations. And I spent a lot of time kind of creating stories to, imagine and then writing them down. And by school age, I was really into reading and writing. So wrote and read a lot of different genres. Fantasy was actually probably my favorite at that time. But I loved coming of age stories as well. Anything that sort of made me feel connected to the characters. So I stuck with it. I had a great teacher in middle school that really encouraged me to stay with my writing. She said it was very creative. And she even said that she could see me becoming a published author one day, which, talk about a heartfelt comment. I mean, it really stuck with me. So then in high school, I took a creative writing class, and I had a teacher there who sort of said the same thing. He really enjoyed my writing, but he told me that I could expand it even more to be a novel style. So he taught me how to do that. And I started writing my first novella in his class, and then stuck with it. I had periods of time in my life where I stopped writing because, life got in the way. And then went back to it after graduate school and created my first fantasy series, which is under my married name, L.E. Thompson, or Laura E. Thompson. But yeah, that's a little about me and my writing journey.
Cool. So did you do graduate work in creative writing, or is your academic background adjacent?
No, actually, it's completely different. It's a higher ed counseling degree. So my goal was to counsel students in college setting. And then actually I ended up, after graduation, kind of getting into the first job that paid, which was at a large corporate bank. And I didn't think I would stay. I thought it was just a stepping stone to get back into higher ed, but I ended up really enjoying it because I found that my skills could be transferable and could be used. Mm-hmm. And then I liked learning all of the ins and outs of the banking industry. So now I've actually been in the banking industry for 16 years.
Wow.
So stuck with it as my 9 to 5 and did my writing and now editing on the side. But I was glad that I made the choices that I made, and you just never know what life's going to throw at you. So.
Mm-hmm. Based on from like an outside perspective such as mine, the banking industry and the writing industry seem very, very different. And even so are those transferable skills? I would assume they are from what you said.
Yeah, they are. I use my writing a bit in my day job. I am in a governance role there, so it's very much creating PowerPoint decks to send up to the executive level. So all of those have to be written in a certain way. Mm-hmm. And then I write comprehensive notes afterward, and same. So they have to be written in a very specific manner. It was a little tricky for me to get used to writing notes like that because it's a lot of bulleted bulleted notes. and no periods at the end, and they have to be short, sweet, to the point.
Yeah.
Which is tough for a novelist.
I had to do that as well at times, and it drives me crazy. I feel like I'm drooling on the keyboard, not making a complete sentence.
Right.
Hey, yep.
But
effective and efficient transfer.
I do enjoy it.
Yeah, effective transference of information. That's what they want. So let's talk a little bit about your most recent two novels, switching gears a bit. Both of these novels were published this year, and the second being released very recently. Was it early April, right?
Yes, April 6th. My birthday, actually.
Oh, well, happy birthday a little bit late, and congratulations.
Thank you.
So, navigating the publication of two novels in such quick succession must, I expect, have involved quite a few sleep-deprived nights and a disturbing amount of coffee. How did this series come to be, and how did you manage this?
Coffee, yes. Sleepless nights, some.
Okay.
So actually, the Amity Boppin story was released a long time ago. And I decided, I've learned a lot since I wrote it last, and I've gained a editing partner as well, which changed things for me. He's taught me a lot that I didn't realize before, especially about industry standards and what's expected. And the technical side of the writing. So I pulled it from the shelves and decided to change it. Not completely, but a large portion of it. I edited it all the way through again multiple times, and then changed the cover, changed some of the details on the inside in the story. So I just feel like I tightened it up quite a bit, and then re-released it in January. And then right after, I had been working on Hattie's story as well, and did the same thing for that. So finished it up, did all of the editing with my partner, and then he created the covers for me. We did the covers, and then released that one on my birthday. And I am partway through editing book 3 as well.
Oh, fantastic! So what does book 3 deal with?
Yeah, so they're all heavy topics, like you said. The first is Amity's story, which is actually my story of, based on my story anyway. Some details changed, people's names and even characters added in. But it is true. I grew up with epilepsy, being diagnosed on Christmas morning when I was 12, and then feeling like it changed my life completely. So that one was difficult to write. I mean, it took me years to write it, to go back and remember all those sometimes painful memories, And then Hattie's story really was inspired by several friends of mine that went through body image struggles. She is a dancer that, it's her favorite thing in the world is to dance and express herself that way. But she's a larger girl in comparison to all of the, smaller girls in her class. And that causes a lot of angst for her and a lot of heartache too. She has a teacher that actually says to her, gee, you should think about going on a diet.
Oh.
And I mean, that's heart wrenching, especially for a kid.
This would have been at what age, like 12 years old?
Yeah, 12, 13. Yeah. And that is based on a true story of a friend of mine, a couple different friends growing up. Her personality is sort of a combination of the two, but that specific incident did happen to a friend of mine. She was about that age too, and a teacher said that to her. And I mean, it was devastating. She wanted to be a professional dancer, so to have somebody say that to you just crushes you. So I thought it was important to talk about that because a lot of girls struggle with that same topic. So I want them to feel seen and heard and understood. And then the new story, the one coming out hopefully in June, that's my goal. And that one is Guy Pendleton's story. So male main character, which I love writing male main characters. They're so much fun. They're different than females. So his story is pretty heavy too, but it's actually my favorite. And they do end on positive notes. I don't want people to think they are all doom and gloom. But his story deals with suicide. So and mental health issues. Yeah. So his brother, who was kind of his hero, struggled with bipolar disorder in high school and then committed suicide. And that caused Guy to struggle with his own just his own mental health and his own grief, and he started having a stutter after that happened.
Hmm.
And they couldn't help. They tried therapists and all these different tactics, and it didn't seem to work. So the parents just sort of gave up, and he struggled with the stutter. He didn't ever want to speak in class, even though he knew all the answers, because he felt people would laugh at him. But the one time he didn't have an issue with it was when he would sing and write music. And that
Hmm.
was something that his brother taught him. So he feels like maybe he doesn't have that because his brother's there with him at that time.
Mm.
But that's his way to express his feelings.
Okay.
And then so it's his story, kind of going through that whole journey, and then learning to accept himself for who he is, and then finding friends that accepted him, and then he feels better about himself,
Hmm.
and he gains the confidence to share his music with everybody.
Hmm. Yeah.
So his story is heavy, but it's good.
Okay, I wasn't expecting suicide with that, but yeah,
Hmm.
I did sort of expect that the next book might be on Guy.
Yeah.
And are we to hear more about Feather as well?
Yes, yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
Feather's story is interesting too. It's very different. So she's comes from a strict religious family, um, who they obviously sort of believe in what you would expect, a heaven and a hell, and a one God. Her struggle is that she sees spirits and
Hmm.
can speak to spirits. And so that causes a lot of inner conflict, because if there are spirits in the world, how is that possible? They're supposed to be in heaven or hell, and if
Hmm.
she sees them, what does that mean?
Oh,
Is
yeah.
she some sort of, you know, like, is she possessed by somebody? Is she,
Hmm.
like, is somehow evil? So she struggles with the fact that she can't tell anybody about it,
Hmm.
because, she feels like she would be completely cut off from her family if that was the case, abandoned by them. And she feels like nobody else would understand. Nobody sees ghosts. Why would anybody
Right.
believe me? So that's her struggle. And then she's also becomes friends with the same kind of group of people in high school. So Sam, um, not Sam. Well, Sam is a new character, but Guy
Okay.
and Amity, and a little bit of Hattie, but mostly Amity and Guy.
Hmm.
So her friendship with them really helps her, accept who she is, and then find some clarity as to why she has this ability.
Hmm. So you're in all these stories, you're dealing with some pretty heavy topics, as we've discussed,
Mhm.
and Amity's is initially probably in terms of shock. Well, I don't want to say shock value, but in terms of right up there in your face at the beginning. She's 12 years old, and at Christmas time has a pretty severe epileptic seizure. It's the first one she's had, and then yeah, Hattie suffers from the body image issue, and
Mhm.
so. I'm curious, how did your intended audience sort of impact the way you went about writing about these heavy issues?
Right. So the intended audience is middle school and high school,
Hmm.
and obviously adults too, but those are the intended audience. So I knew that these are heavy topics, but in reality, children do go through these heavy things, and a lot of the time they don't feel like, maybe adults don't understand, or they don't know that these children are experiencing these heavy things on a deep level. And maybe they don't get them the help that they need, the counseling that they need.
Hmm.
So I wanted to specifically target those children and say, hey, we we know that you go through these things, and we want to help you, manage them, find your voice, and ultimately be able to move past them, um, and just feel, like I said, seen and feel understood. I think that a lot of kids struggle with something in their life that makes them feel different, makes them feel like an outsider, makes them feel like a freak, right?
Hmm.
Especially during those times, you're going through a lot of body changes, a lot of mental changes, and you're hyper aware of how other people see you.
Hmm.
So it becomes a big struggle. Like, are other kids laughing at me? Other kids judging me? Especially with bullying. and online thrown in there, it causes even more of those feelings, I think. So knowing that, I also wanted these stories to be uplifting and positive, and I wanted to be real, but I wanted to be gentle. So I thought about, vocabulary, how I'm describing things, the setting that I'm describing them in, and then ultimately the children realizing on their own that, hey, maybe I'm not so different, maybe I'm not such a freak, because other people are struggling with something too. But it was important to me to not have the adults tell them that, right? Like, these children
Oh,
go
okay.
through it on their own, and they
Hmm.
figure it out on their own.
Hmm.
So it gives them kind of that hope of, hey, maybe I have this inner strength all on my own, and I just
Hmm.
need to tap into it.
Yeah, and middle school itself is difficult on its own without this added baggage of dealing with
Right.
a new diagnosis of epilepsy, without dealing with a relative committing suicide, any of that
Hmm.
stuff, and having that compounded, very difficult. One thing I did get in your writing style, at least, was almost the style is obviously much more advanced than what a seventh or eighth grader would write, but almost a diary feel about it.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
Hattie and Amity coming to realize this stuff on their own, as you said, but working through it in this very mature way.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm glad that came across, because that was another thing that it was really unique for my writing. So I write fantasy novels as well, and those are always third person. They're a wider view. You do have moments of first person where it jumps into the character's head, but for the most part, they're that wider third person view, and I love writing in that style. So when I wrote this series, it sort of came out in a very different way. They are written in first person,
Mm,
um, which was unusual for me. But I think it stemmed from the fact that Amity's story is my story. So it's very much my own journal style thinking at that time. And like, basically, if I was to have been writing a journal at that time, or writing a diary, this is what would have come out.
mm,
Um, and the story itself, I mean, it is based on my life, but a lot of the different pieces of things that she goes through, the different experiences that she has, were not all in middle school for me. So I threw them
mm,
all into middle school to kind
mm.
of
Okay.
wrap it into that time frame. But some of these things happened to me in college or in high school or even as adult. But like I said, I kind of tweaked them to make them be all in that time period, because
Mm,
I wanted her to stay in that age. So
mm. Yeah, none of the issues really seemed out of place in terms of how
that's
old
good.
they were. Yeah. So, also, let's talk about your choice of literary architecture. Or I'm using that. I don't know if I made that phrase up or not. Literary architecture here, and how the two books relate to one another. But the two novels take place in the same time period, from the respective perspectives of these two best friends, Amity and Hattie. And I'd love to hear more about why you chose or how you came up with this approach, and maybe if it's going to
Yeah.
continue on in the other novels.
Yep, it definitely does. They all intertwine. I thought that was important to keep to a core group of characters. I add in new characters, and some of them will have their own stories as well. So you build this world, where they're all
Mm-hmm.
connected. And I felt that was important. I did grow up in a small town in a school that we only had 200 children, and it was kindergarten through eighth grade.
Oh
So
my,
we were
yeah.
very much, tapped into each other's lives in a deep way that I don't feel like maybe you do if you go to a bigger school.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that was important to me, and I felt, especially if people are introduced to a character in a first book, then to be able to say, "Hey, I sort of connect to that character. I wish that they had a book of their own." Well, hopefully they do. Hopefully you connect, with one of them, and then you get that character's full background story later. So that's really just the way. It wasn't necessarily planned. I don't write notes for myself. I'm not somebody that plans everything out. I'm a not a planner. I'm a panster, as they call them, which is
Mm-hmm.
just sort of a fly by the seat of your pants writer. So it sort of just comes out the way I feel like it's meant to. But once Hattie was introduced to an Amity story, I thought she's got her own stuff. She needs her own book.
Mhm.
And I kind of felt that way for a lot of them.
Yeah, I thought that was a really interesting way of doing things, because the two girls experience or they're involved in the same situation at times, but the perspectives on it are very, very different. And the one that came to mind to me initially was when they're at the dance. And in terms of how important that was to Amity, she was disturbed by the fact that the strobe lights came on and she was afraid she was going to have a seizure, and so she had to leave. And that's most of what we heard about in the dance. But for Hattie, what stuck with her was the fact that Amity got asked to dance several times and Hattie
Hmm.
didn't. And that didn't
Right.
even register for Amity. I don't even remember it registering for Amity, or she didn't mention it very much, or at least
Right.
maybe I just forgot it. But I thought that was a really interesting inclusion, how you worked that in.
Thanks. Yeah. Yeah. It again, just to show the different perspectives, of
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people can go through, even siblings can go through an event, but then experience it differently in their own minds.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very much whatever you have going on inside your life, inside your head and what you're experiencing, you're gonna have a different perspective than somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to show that too. And actually Guy has a piece of that story as well, that same scene as well, um, from his perspective. So yeah, I think it's important to show the differences.
Mm-hmm. And also, but there was another scene where I think they remembered the dialogue almost word for word identically. I'm trying to
Hmm.
find it. Yeah, and it's the scene where they're talking about their unique personal traits being both markers of identity and sources of insecurity. And that
Hmm.
seems a pretty focal point in both
Yes. Yeah.
books, where the series title "Freak You're Unique" almost gets
Hmm.
defined right there, or that maybe
Right.
seemed inspiration for it. But yeah, I'd love to hear you talk more about that as well.
Yeah. So that is a pivotal moment, especially for Hattie. And that was the moment
Mm-hmm.
where when she is explaining to Amity, because Amity feels so alone, right? She feels so different from all of her friends. They don't have to be on medication. They don't need to leave a dance
Mm-hmm.
because strobe lights come on. They don't need to go to bed early, or they might have a seizure because they're too overtired, right? So
Mm-hmm.
all of that, and the big thing is the hair falling out. I mean, my that was a true story as well. That they put me on my medication. It was so strong at first
Mm-hmm.
that it caused my hair to fall out. Not
Oh
all of it,
my.
but large chunks of it. And I mean, talk about feeling, completely different than your friends. I wanted so badly to be able to wear a hat and cover it up. Nobody look at me.
Mm-hmm.
Wanted to be invisible. And that's such a struggle, and I wasn't allowed to wear a hat in school, so I
Oh.
just had to sit there and you know pull my hair up and kind of just hope that fold it over in different ways, cover the bald spots,
Mm-hmm.
hope that nobody noticed or nobody said anything. So she's so much in her own pain that then for Hattie to kind of shed some light on it, like, hey, it's not just you. Like you're not that different. Like we do understand your peers are not judging you as much as you think they are. And
Mm-hmm.
we're all going through different things too. And so she was very much a teacher for Amity, and she brought her kind of out of her own emotions to be able to say, oh yeah, look around. Gee, eh, a lot of my friends are struggling with stuff. Gee, Hattie, you're struggling with your own thing and I'm not there for you. I need
Mm-hmm.
to be there for you. Like you're struggling with your own stuff. So I think it was important to kind of introduce that in Amity's story because it was a very pivotal moment for her to then be able to move on, right, and move past her
Mm-hmm.
own things. Um, but then it was important to show it from Hattie's point of view because for Hattie it's much more of a frustration, right? She's like, gee, I know that you're struggling and I'm there for you and I support you, but I've got my own stuff.
Yeah.
I would love it if you would kind of like pay attention. Just know I'm here too. I'm going through this
Mm-hmm.
too. And so, yeah, I think it's important to show it from that perspective, which is why I actually did that one sentence I did copy word for word because, but then added the emotions behind it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a point that I desperately wanted to drive home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, another focal point that I saw, I can't remember if it was Hattie or Amity who realizes this, but I think it was actually Amity. But she realizes that the people who are teasing her about things that the person who's teasing feels insecure about themselves. And
Right.
it's the...
I've
I'm sorry,
always
go
heard
ahead.
that. I've heard that from adults that if you're being bullied, it's because the bullier feels, you know, insecure about themselves. They're going through their own thing.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe don't let them get away with hurting you on the one hand. Stand up for yourself, be firm, put up boundaries. But don't put up blockades, right? Don't
Mm-hmm.
don't shut yourself out completely from people because you're worried about them bullying you, and just know that maybe the bullies are going through their own stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
just bear that in mind and kill them with kindness, basically.
Yeah.
And maybe it'll change their attitudes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, whether that's true or not, I mean, in my life, I've had instances and experiences where that doesn't seem to be true. I
Mm-hmm.
try really hard to be a positive person and to encourage other people and to, teach them like, hey, if you need to open up to somebody, I'm here. That's my counseling side.
Mm-hmm.
um, and it doesn't always work, honestly. There are people
Mm-hmm.
that you just can't save, you just can't help. They are so into their own pain that they're not willing to open up. And that's
Mm-hmm.
okay. It's just, I feel bad, it's a struggle for them, but it's not my place to help or change them.
Right. Yeah. It's like pounding your head against a brick wall. I've encountered people
Right.
with whom it's just very difficult to even have a conversation
Mm-hmm.
at times.
Yep.
And that it's very frustrating because
It is.
you want to have empathy, and it's almost impossible to actually have meaningful empathy in a situation like that.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
And I do feel again that on social media really points that out in obvious ways. If you're trying to have a discussion with somebody about a difference of opinion, I mean, it's so easy for people to jump in and really throw some hateful comments in there. And you
Mm-hmm.
can try to explain, you can try to, go back with some positivity to them. Well, hey, think about it this way or whatever. This is what I meant. I meant no offense. And sometimes it just does not work. I mean, sometimes you
Yeah.
just have to get up, give up and leave the conversation because you're going to get nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
so, yeah.
I completely understand. I've been
Mhm.
there. But it seems like middle school kids these days, I would assume that most of them are, at least in some capacity, involved or connected in social media. And so the
Yeah.
problems that they encounter today, especially the sort of problems that you outline in these two novels, I would think they might be exacerbated by social media even more. Or do you see it
Yeah.
maybe being a source of support in some way?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, both. I think, it
Mm-hmm.
can be definitely a source of stress and anxiety. It causes anxiety a lot. They've done studies about
Mm-hmm.
especially younger people, um, and especially girls, believe it or not.
Mm-hmm.
Guys too, obviously, but girls, especially at a young age, are very, very sensitive, and they take everything internally. So there's been studies about how online bullying can cause, um, especially suicide rates, to
Mm-hmm.
go anxiety, depression, all of that to kind of affect women and girls. So that may be a plan for the books in the future. I mean, they take place in the 90s in the beginning, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think about, maybe at some point we make these characters become adults and their children go through these struggles in current time period,
Mm-hmm.
and throw the online part in there because I do think that's important.
Mm-hmm.
It's a huge struggle now, so.
Mm-hmm.
But it
You know,
can be, like you said, it can be a positive. There definitely be a support system out there if you find the right group of people. I love Threads, for example. I'm on Threads now. I was on Twitter and found Twitter to be extremely toxic after a
mm-hmm.
while, and finally just had to leave. because it was affecting my mental health. It was causing me stress. So then I found Threads, and Threads is a super supportive community. Obviously, there are some negative, some bad apples out there, but really, I found a lot of author support there. Other authors, and then people such as yourself that interview authors and want to help them spread the word and spread their messages. So it's been great. I really like it.
So yeah, I imagine also even as recently as the 90s, diagnoses and medical advancements, and even psychological advancements with both of these issues have, I would like to think, progressed in terms of our understanding of both epilepsy and body image issues. So I'm not sure how to quite phrase this question, but yeah, do you see a difference between how those issues might have been dealt with in the 90s and how they might be dealt with now?
I do. And I can speak specifically to the epilepsy. When I was a child and I was diagnosed, there were maybe 3 different types of medications that you could take if you needed to be on medication. Mine was Depakote. So it was an extremely harsh medication. There was a lot of side effects to it, but it was really one of the only ones that was available. So they said basically, we try this. If it doesn't work, you can try a couple others. But if those don't work, we'll have to think of other methods to deal with it. And luckily it did work for me, but it was tough. And I didn't realize at the time, how much it affected me, how much it affected my brain. I was a student that I had okay grades, but I struggled in school. I struggled trying to remember facts. I struggled with trying to feel like they made sense. And I felt cloudy headed a lot of the time. I felt like I was a bit walking around in a fog, sort of a zombie, and didn't realize that's not me. That's actually the medication. But we didn't know, we didn't know that back then. And then as an adult, I was planning to get pregnant, and in my 20s or 30s, almost 30s. And I had a doctor that said to me, well, you can't be on Depakote if you're going to get pregnant because it can cause major birth defects to the baby. So we need to wean you off of that and put you on something else. And he said, but now, there's 8, 9, 10 different medications that we can try. So when I went off of it and went on to something else it's a bit lighter, and I was shocked at the difference in my own personality. I have a lot more energy. I can think clearly. I can remember things really easily. I felt happier, emotionally and everything. I thought, wow, this is what it's like to be a person. So I think the medical advances are huge. And obviously not for everything, but I think for a lot of diseases nowadays, they're coming up with new cures and new advances in all of that technology and that medication, and medications and all of that. So it's really good. I think even mental health, even emotional health, those have made great strides as well. I think a lot of therapists do research and group research, experiments and all of that, talking to people that have the different diagnoses and the different issues, the different diseases, and kind of say conditions and track them, and track their experiences, and that teaches a lot. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm almost seeing these 2 books as being maybe incorporated into some kind of curriculum in a middle school English class or something along those lines, and that being part of the process of destigmatizing things like this, or things that might classify people as different. And our diagnostic tools have gotten a lot better. since the 90s. Like autism is actually a diagnosable thing right now, much
Yeah,
more than it
exactly.
used to be. That's for sure. I grew up in the 80s,
Mm-hmm.
and oh boy, it was not a diagnosis. It wasn't something that was diagnosed then. It was put
Right.
all those kids into
Personality
the.
disorders are another big one.
Mhm.
ADHD and ADD is another big one
Mhm.
that's made huge strides. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, and that would be honestly that's my biggest goal is for
Mhm.
schools and libraries to find these and to say that, wow, these are great and they need to be incorporated in, our lessons. That would just touch my heart so much. So I
Mhm.
hope that that's the case. I'm not quite sure how to go about making sure that that happens, but I hope to figure that out.
Yeah.
They are self-published, not traditionally published, so it's a little trickier for self-published authors, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
Well, we can hope, and self-published authors are getting a lot more respect now than
yeah,
they used
I
to.
think so. I'm so glad.
Another thing that struck me about both books was that, I mean, you mentioned this before, that they aren't all doom and gloom. They aren't all two girls just wallowing in self-pity the entire time, but they
Right.
do work through their problems. They are represented as empowered in a certain way, even though they're up against difficult situations. And I
Hmm.
think that would also be an excellent message to include. I think it
Yeah,
is an
yeah,
excellent message to include.
yeah, yeah. I hope so. I want children to feel like they have inner power, and they're just not maybe they just doubt it or they're not sure how to use that to help themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I feel like kids are a lot smarter, a lot more intuitive than
Mm-hmm.
people maybe give them credit for, and they have that ability to help themselves change and see themselves differently than they do.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, and in middle school, that has to be so much more difficult because you're right, sort of in between being a child and being in high school, and
yeah.
there's such a lack of agency right there, and figuring out
Hmm.
one's identity and trying on different identification hats. I'll use that word for now, but
Hmm.
yeah. So I was going to ask you why you chose the middle school period, and I think it's pretty obvious you've already answered that
Yeah.
question.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. And I hope it makes sense. I hope people connect to it and are glad. I'd love for parents to find these books as well and say, wow, this might help my daughter. I know she's struggling with this, and I'm at a loss as to how to connect or how to make her understand that I'm here for her, and maybe
Mm-hmm.
these will help. You know.
Mm-hmm. Just as important for parents to read as for their children to read. So we've already talked about this being so far a two-part series. We can expect two more books in the series, one on Guy and one on Feather.
Mhm. Mhm.
When can we hope for those?
Guys, I'm hoping we'll be out by this summer, so June or
Mm-hmm.
July timeframe. And then Feathers will probably be closer to October.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm actually writing a fifth right now. I don't know if that'll make it out this year or if it'll be January of next year, but that one too is based on a true story.
Mm-hmm.
My brother-in-law Dave was born with spinal bifida and Chiari 3, and Chiari is a condition I don't think many people know about, but it's where your brain is a bit too far on your brain, back on your brainstem, so it pinches
Mm-hmm.
the nerve endings in your neck
Mm-hmm.
over time, and that causes you to lose functions. So he used to be able to walk with crutches. He
Mm-hmm.
can't anymore. He's in a wheelchair now.
Oh.
He lost the ability for his lungs to breathe on their own, so he's has a trach and is connected to breathing machines now.
Oh
But
boy.
he is one of the most inspiring people I've ever met in my life. Gonna get a little choked up. They told him when he was born, they told his mother he had 12 surgeries right off the bat when he was a baby. And
Wow.
they told his mother, don't expect him to live past, you know, perhaps past these surgeries, but definitely not past age 5. It's going to get worse. He's not going to
Mm-hmm.
live. Fast forward, age 16, and they
Mm-hmm.
said, oh, yeah, but he's definitely not going to live, into his teens. He lived past his teens. Age 21, he went into the hospital and almost died. He was
Mm-hmm.
he was halfway gone by the time we sort of realized that he was struggling to breathe. And then they rushed him to the hospital. He spent 3 months there, and he came out of it, and he came home. And then, they said, well, wow, he lived through that, but don't expect him to live much longer. He's now turning 40 this year. So huge, huge, huge inspiration. His will to live is stronger than anybody's I've ever met. And his whole goal in life is to make people smile and make people laugh. He's extremely friendly. He's extremely kind to people. He was my closest friend when I moved to their state, to Massachusetts, and I was alone. My husband had to go out to sea. He was in the Coast Guard. So I was alone in this strange, state. I didn't know anybody. I didn't have anything to do. I didn't have a job. I wasn't in grad school yet. And Dave and I did everything together. I mean, we went to the movies, we shopped, we hung out, watched the same shows. He was the closest friend I had at the time. And he always made me laugh and made me feel better, made me feel not so alone, without my husband. So I wanted to tell his story, and hopefully I'll do it well. We'll see. I mean, it's going to be another one that's going to be a emotional one to write. But I don't know, all of the details of his life, so I'm going to be making some stuff up. It'll still be fiction, but a huge portion of it will be real. So
I'm wondering, how do you even tell, like a 12-year-old, you have this condition and you're going to be lucky to live a few more years? That I can't even comprehend how that would be done. And
I know. Talk about emotional, and that's why I think he wanted to prove people wrong. That was his goal. Screw you! I'm not going to die. I'm gonna find a way to live. And he
Good
has.
for him.
I mean, he's in the hospital now, and we went to see him. Well, he just got home, but he again, we thought, well, this is it. This is it. He got too sick. He had some issues in a surgery that he had to have, and we thought, man, there's no way. Like he's not gonna get out of this. So we went up there and visited him. Didn't say goodbye, but we told him how much we loved him, and then he came home. Last Thursday, he was sent home. So again, just
a tough dude.
will to live. He's a stubborn dude. He's like, no, I'm not giving up. So yeah, it's crazy. He's so inspiring. So I hope that his story will hit hard with people too.
Yeah, that sounds like a very good topic for the series as well. So you're the author of a couple other series as well, Elven Quest and The Witches of, and forgive my pronunciation, Tradbeldum.
That's right. Hey, good job.
I got it. Okay, cool. So I've only read about Hattie and Amity. I haven't read anything in these other two. I assume they're both fantasy series, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So what could we expect from those?
So they're very, very different. Like I said, Elven Quest is epic fantasy. It's based on the hero's journey style. So, very much based on, inspired by Lord of the Rings. And Harry Potter to an extent, but definitely Lord of the Rings was huge. Tolkien is the father of fantasy, though, so I feel like everybody's inspired by him. You can't not be. But yeah, that one was my first written series. The first is a trilogy, but I actually a couple years later, wrote a second trilogy for it. So the characters are 20 years older. And that's going to be coming out hopefully the next couple of years. I'm working on editing book 4 now. So that series follows Isabel, who is a half-elf. She's born in again, very much inspired by me. She's born in a small town. She feels different from her friends. She has these strange abilities that nobody else seems to have, and she doesn't know where they came from. She doesn't know she's a half elf in the beginning. She thinks that she's a human, just like her father. her mother has passed away, so she really doesn't know anything about her mother.
Mm-hmm.
And they are suddenly faced at the very beginning, the first chapter, I think. There's a threat coming to their village of these dark, evil creatures that nobody really knows what they are, where they came from, why they're there, but they're hunting people down. And so they're in danger. And she meets an older woman in the woods who says to her, "Your people are planning to fight. They'll lose. You need to get them out. They need to go into hiding. And you need to convince them." And Isabel says, "How am I going to do that? I'm a kid. I'm 14 years old. They're not going to listen to me." And she says, "No, you have the ability to convince them." And she said, "Focus your mind and concentrate on what you need them to believe, and they will believe you." So Isabel thinks she's nuts, but she goes back
Yeah.
home and, you know, does that, and lo and behold, the elders believe her, and they go into hiding. They live. She realizes, hey, I've got more going on than I think I do, and what else is this lady going to tell me? So she goes back to the woman, and then finds out the truth about her heritage and her past, and then she's sent on a quest to find other people to help them solve their problems with the evil creatures coming back. Um, so again, it was kind of one of those coming of age stories where she needs to learn to believe in herself. She needs to learn to accept her power and use it for the positive outcome. But the big theme in that story is that people of different backgrounds can come together to fight a
Oh,
common
okay.
evil. So there's a lot of different races of elves and humans, and they're very different. They grew up differently. They have different perspectives, but if they can stop arguing, they can come together and they can solve these problems.
Yeah.
So that's huge. And then the Witches of Chad Belden series I wrote many years later. That is an adult series. Do not let kids read it because
Okay.
it starts off fairly innocent, but it gets spicy, as they say,
Okay.
and darker and stuff as the series goes along. But those characters are not young; they're in their 20s. So I felt like it was okay to throw those things in and connect to an older audience. So and that sort of too has the same similar themes that this tribe of witches are in hiding. They've always been sort of in danger because of their beliefs. They believe in many gods and goddesses versus those in power that believe in a one god. And they've been hunted down for a long time, and they just as well as other magical groups. So it's based on Celtic mythology. So there
Oh,
are a
cool.
lot of different groups, but they just have had enough. They get to the point where they say, "We're sick of hiding. We need to fight. We need to get our freedom back. Let's kind of come together and figure out a way to do that, and gain that power back." So yeah, similar themes, just very different ways of going about them. I felt like.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Different contexts and different approaches, different audiences.
Right.
Cool. So you are also part owner of the Writer's Journey Services, which is, I looked at the website a little bit, and you offer a lot of stuff there for up and coming writers. Yeah. So
We do. We do.
yeah, if I were writing a book, why would I go to you? Well, I know why I would go to you, but
Right.
what,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. So I mentioned before I have an editing partner. I met him right during the time that I was self-publishing the Elven Quest series. So I was back in 2013. I think I met him a few years later. And he and I had very similar experience with publishing, where we had trusted a company that was supposed to be an all-encompassing company that would edit your book and create the cover art, create media for you, and then publish it. They are called Vanity Publishers. They go by different names. Mine said that it was a subsidy hybrid traditional subsidy publishing company. They weren't. I mean, they a lot of what they claim just didn't pan out the way they claim it will. Their editing supposedly was comprehensive, which means it covers line, copy, development, and formatting. but they did a terrible job, honestly. They rush it. They created just a terrible product. I mean, it was really not up to standard the way it should have been. So I was disappointed and lost a lot of money. And he had a similar issue. He lost quite a bit more money than I did, but similar problem with a company that was called Ghostwriting Publishing Company. He didn't use them for ghostwriting, but it was the same thing. Oh, we'll edit it. We'll, do all these things for you. Again, terrible. Like when I read his, I was pretty shocked at the amount of errors still left in the manuscript, and same with him for mine. So we bonded over that.
Are we talking are we talking like typos or
all kinds of errors?
I mean,
story gaps, the developmental stuff. They didn't touch development in my story. So there were definitely gaps in the story. There were areas where it dragged, the pacing was off. There were characters that could have been developed more, and I didn't see any of that. And on top of that, there was a lot of spelling and grammar and punctuation issues as well. So they just rushed the whole thing, basically. And so he and I bonded over that experience, and we said, it's really a shame. Like, we don't want that to happen to other people. We both agreed on that, but we didn't join together right away. He went to school for line and copy editing, and was top in his class, and then created it's sort of a macro or an app that's sort of like Grammarly, where it points out areas that need to be reviewed in your manuscript, but it doesn't change anything for you. It's not AI. It's more just, flagging them. But it's specifically geared toward novel writing versus Grammarly is just grammar for any kind of writing. So Grammarly and programs like that can lose your author voice if you were to accept all the changes. His doesn't. It's much more based on industry standards for novels. But he started his own freelance company and was doing that. And then on my end, I was doing the same thing. I was studying developmental editing because I feel like that's where my strength is. And then I was a freelance editor on sites like Upworks. And I did that for about 2 years. He worked on his for about 2 years. And then in October of this past year, I said we had been working together, editing each other's stuff for all that time, and love each other's writing. And I said to him, I know you're doing well on your own, but what do you think about combining our talents and kind of creating a editing company that they can get 2 editors for 1, and we can focus on our strengths, but we can help each other? And he's like, I'm all in. Say awesome. No more. I'm all in. Which is so heartfelt, so humbling. I was so glad. We're best friends, so it was awesome. And then at first we were just going to do editing, and then it kind of expanded. He learned some things about cover art and started practicing that. I learned a bit about media and how to advertise. And then we both write fantasy, so we loved creating fantasy maps for people. So we do that too. So it just, and I said,
you make maps for people?
All these, yeah.
That's really cool.
Fantasy maps for their world. Yeah. So I said to him, there's no need to stifle ourselves and stick to this one thing. I think the services are all offered separately, so you don't have to add those things in. If you have your own cover artist, fine. But if you want to, and you choose our editing service too, we'll give you 1% off, so you're not paying as much. We want to help as much as possible. So yeah, it's been great so far. We quickly expanded from just the editing to the other services as of November, and it's been really, really good. Had a couple of clients, right away, and then we've had a huge boom in the last 2 months, signed quite a few clients for April and May, and already signing people for June. So it's been great so far. It's so much fun to work together, and it's so much fun to work with the authors and to be able to collaborate as a group to check each other's work. We have these heated discussions sometimes about, hey, we're gonna suggest this to the author, and I'll say, well, I don't like that. I don't want to, I think that's not what's correct or whatever. And we'll research and we'll Google. Sometimes he reaches out to his old professor, and we talk about it, and we'll come to an agreement. And sometimes it's me that wins, but but sometimes it's him. But we try to make sure everything that we're suggesting matches with industry standard, because we want the books to be as professional as possible by the end. And then there are some, rules that can be broken by the author. It's their choice. And then, like I said, there are some standards, some rules that you really do have to stick to if you want to be considered professional. So, yeah, so we work together, I think, really well. The clients all agree so far. So we've had a good time.
Very cool.
I'm excited about it. I'm excited to see where it goes.
So when you say industry standard, could you maybe give me an example of that?
Yeah, so there's specific standards in terms of formatting, word count.
Okay.
Gosh, whatever. Grammar, spelling, punctuation. There's a lot of just different schools of thought of things. But then realistically, if you were to go to a traditional publisher route, right, and try to query for your book, they would expect to see certain things. And, something like an Oxford comma, which I don't know if people know what that is, but it's basically if you're listing, if you have a list, right, and you're saying, I'm going to the grocery store and getting eggs, milk, and cheese, right? Some people don't put the comma before the and. If you do, it's considered an Oxford comma. And if you don't, then I'm not sure what that's called. But that's one of those things where, again, it's sort of an industry standard. Like industry, the trad publishing industry would expect an Oxford comma. Some people don't want to put it in, and that's their choice. But we always say, okay, well, this is what the industry would expect. If you decide to traditionally publish, they're going to want to see that. But if you don't, that's fine. Do what you think.
Okay.
So
I was almost thinking in terms of like if you're writing a fantasy book, then you have to have its own worked out magic system, and that being sort of an industry standard for the genre. But I think that would be too much. It would be imposing too much, wouldn't it? To have that kind of requirement.
I think it would. I mean, obviously it's an expectation that fantasy has that, but it's not always the case. I mean, I think sometimes, maybe there's the system is called something else, not magic necessarily, but it's, maybe just abilities or something to that effect. But yeah, there are certain expectations. But then there are definitely people that go against the grain and they do make it. They are popular, even in the trad route. There are people that maybe their book is longer than expected. It's for an age range. You want it to be 50,000 words for, this genre for this age range. And theirs is, closer to 100,000. And there's a lot of people that would say, well, you need to cut that book into half. But they'll say, no, I really believe that it needs to be this length. It tells the full story. It's important. If I cut out anything else, it's going to hurt the integrity of the story. And then, they happen to find an agent that agrees, and they believe in it, and they'll push it to the publishers that way, and they make it. So you don't know, but in terms of what we know is typically expected, that's what we'll suggest to people. And then, obviously it's always up to the author to listen or not listen, or agree or not agree, change things back. We don't want to ever hurt their voice. So we have times where we'll make a suggestion on language and they'll say, well, I think that's a little too, sophisticated for that character to say. They don't have that education. They might not say it that way. That's fine. We'll either change it back to what you had, or we'll come up with something that you agree that we think makes sense for the character to say that's still powerful. We want it to have power. So yeah. Cool. So that's our goals.
Yeah. So what advice would you give to up and coming authors who might be maybe in a position to test the waters with regard to how they want their work edited or even published right now?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of this industry blew up in the last few years, with good and bad, right? There's a lot of people that have a lot of knowledge and have had a lot of experiences now that can provide professional help to an author. There's a lot of companies that don't, right? There's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people that will present themselves as, oh, I have this experience, and it's a scam, or it's just not going to be quality. So I think
Mm-hmm.
it's important for authors to take time, don't rush. If you're going to do, especially if you're going to do the self-publishing route, make sure you are studying and researching and understanding. There's different types of edits, right? There's different types of editing companies. There's different types of publishing companies now. There are readers. There's a lot of people out there that are beta readers, alpha readers, ARC readers, proofreaders, all these things. Sometimes those people charge money, sometimes they don't. And what they're bringing to the table is important. So you
Mm-hmm.
need to make sure that they have, some background. It's okay to try somebody that's new. Maybe they're just starting their business, they don't have any background. That's fine,
Mm-hmm.
as long as they're honest about it and hey, maybe you need to have this looked at again after you hire this person and have them go through it, give them a chance to build up their portfolio, but then make sure you got a second set of eyes
Mm-hmm.
to make sure that it's up to par. So yeah, I would say just do the best you can to ask people in the industry, do the research, make sure you're vetting your folks that are helping you, because you want quality. And then big thing is too, make sure that you're paying attention to are they offering a contract to you? Are they going to return your money if you're not satisfied?
Mm-hmm.
All of that's important. There's
Yeah.
so many people, and it just breaks my heart. There's so many people that will invest a bunch of money in something, and then the person just ghosts them. They take their money and walk, and
Yeah.
there's nothing they can do about it.
No legal
So yeah.
recourse or anything like that, huh? That's
Mm-hmm.
awful.
Right.
So, where can we find your books? Are they all on Kindle? I assume at least the two I got were on
They
Kindle.
are.
And
Yeah, they are not Kindle Unlimited. I
mm-hmm.
was on that for a while and I took them off. I didn't see a good result from it, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
So you do have to pay, but they're all very reasonably priced.
Mm-hmm.
Way cheaper than a cup of coffee is what I like to say. So you can afford them if you do
Yeah.
Kindle. And then printing wise too, I mean, printing costs did just go up.
Yeah.
So, I try to keep those prices low too, but you can't go too low because you'll be losing money.
Mm-hmm.
But try to keep it reasonable. And then I have the first Elven Quest book on Audible,
Mm-hmm.
and the other ones will hopefully be on Audible soon. That's a whole other beast, really, of learning how
Oh yeah.
to do that and finding resources for that. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, then my goal would be to have them all on uh, ebooks, print, and then Audible.
So, Laura, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you for
Let's see.
having me.
You have a website which I will put in the show notes. If you just want to plug it right now, feel more than free. It is what,
Yep.
L.E. Thompson 06?
Right, yeah.
At
Ellie Thompson 06.
Okay, at wixsite.com. Cool. Yeah, I'll put that in the show notes along with a link to Writer's Journey Services.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you once again for coming on. And my cat is bugging me right now, and I can't fend him off any longer. So,
right.
All right. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks so much. Have a good day.